me summarize that for you. 7 days from now, the first 5 Rafale aircraft are arriving. And as you saw in that report, it's not a black and white answer. There's no yes and no to whether the Rafales can instantly be deployed. These are complicated machines, but after all, these are machines that are required for combat. So theoretically, these aircraft will be ready, and the Indian Air Force has also said that. Air Marshal Anil Chopra is a former Indian Air Force veteran. He's also been a qualified test pilot. He's also commanded the air assets of the Indian Air Force in Jammu and Kashmir. So he knows what it's like to be in that area. He's also flown in the Rafale. He's also a veteran Mirage 2000 pilot, which is the predecessor to the Rafale. Thank you, Air Marshal Chopra, for being with me. Also with me is my colleague Sandeep Punithan, executive editor of India Today magazine. Air Marshal Chopra, starting with you, you're a fighter pilot. You were part of the original team that brought the Mirage 2000s back to India from France. The same route is going to be followed now, sir, with the Rafales being ferried back to India. It's a question in many people's minds about whether the fighters can come here and instantly become combat ready as far as Ladakh is concerned. Take us through what it takes to get them to be fully combat ready.
Yeah. You know, as you just mentioned, that we have gone through a similar sequence in 1985 when we brought the Mirage 2000, and there was a little pressure in the country then also. Of course, there was no, conflict situation that we must get this modern aircraft to become operational as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But many things have changed between 1985 and now 2020. You know, the quantum of flying they have done is similar to what we had done in those days in 1985 in France. But the availability of quality of simulation is so good that practically you could do your first solo flight without even doing a two-seater sortie, because the simulation is so very good. So all these pilots would have not only flown some of these missions for air-to-ground weaponry in the air and air-to-air, but also they would have done simulation, and as you beautifully showed a graphic just now, they would have done all kinds of scenarios for all kinds of weaponry. And mind you, the kind of weaponry that comes with modern aeroplanes today, most pilots don't ever get a chance to fire it in their lifetime, leave alone to prepare for it. So all the preparation has to be done on the ground, and when the time comes and the balloon goes up, you go and first time fire your weapon in the air itself. So therefore, when we say, in a normal process, it will take 3 to 4 months for the initial group of pilots to be prepared to become fully ops. But if push comes to shove, and if the nation wants you to quickly deploy,
yes,
the aeroplanes will be available and they can go. Now, if before you ask me the next question, if we go over the 5 questions that you had initially covered,
yes,
I think a lot of points will get covered as we go along.
Okay, very interesting. So, Air Marshal Chopra, who's been a test pilot, he's been a man who's strapped into the cockpits of fighter aircraft to push these aircraft to their limits and actually realize their potential. So he knows what he's talking about. He's flown in the Mirage 2000. He's also flown in the Rafale. And he says that it takes a while to, stretch out the muscle of these aircraft, understand what they can do and get them combat ready. But after all, if push comes to shove, these aircraft are always ready to be deployed. Very interesting statement, Sandeep, from the Indian Air Force, which is usually quite cagey about putting out statements like this a couple of days ago, where they specifically said in a press release that Indian Air Force Rafale pilots are fully operational on this aircraft as well as the advanced weapon systems. Probably very much in keeping with the current atmosphere in the country.
Absolutely, Shiv. This is again signaling that the Indian Air Force has chosen to those very words that you mentioned to talk about the Rafale. And the fact is that everyone knows about the Rafale. Its capabilities are very well known, especially across the border. It comes with 5 big, quantum leaps in technology that the current Indian Air Force aircraft don't have, which you mentioned, the Scalp, the Meteor air-to-air missile, the RB-2 phased array radar, the ASA radar, the integrated electronic warfare system, satellite communications, and now we hear that the Indian Air Force has also placed an order for Hammer standoff air-to-ground missiles. So the weapons are being added on the Rafale even as we speak.
Yes.
And the aircraft is literally flying into the theater of action, Shiv.
Very, very interesting. So they're coming in fully combat ready, and there will be many things that will actually be done, before these aircraft are fully capable of flying in those conditions. But that is not to say they are not ready to fly if called upon to do so. Air Marshal Chopra, very interestingly, like you said, the simulators on which fighter pilots these days train on are extremely realistic, very, very sophisticated. And we are hearing, not surprisingly in the circumstances, that in France, since this entire standoff with China actually began, Indian Air Force pilots have actually loaded scenarios of the Ladakh, Tibet, landscape, and have been practicing flights even in those scenarios, sir.
Absolutely. Now, Shiv, I must also tell you that becoming fully operational is not good enough only for the pilots, but it's also the ground environment.
Yes.
There are radar controllers who are going to control them. There are going to be many other assets on the ground which are important. There will be formations you will have to fly with other aeroplanes. You have to do some practice with them. But that apart, as you rightly said, the simulators are so modern. You can practice each and every mission. Now, secondly, all the pilots don't have to be fully operational in all the roles that you don't have to be fully operational. See,
Yes.
self-protection is fine, but electronic warfare, there can be a specific pilot who's trained on electronic warfare. There is somebody who's more trained on air defense, somebody who's more trained on strike.
Yes.
So normally what we did, like we have done in Gwalior in the Mirage squadrons, that there are roles which have been assigned. So similarly, if it's a group of pilots, maybe first 8, 10 pilots, they will be specialists in some roles. And within 2-3 months, all will become specialists in more roles.
Yes.
So there is a way about how you will go about, getting to employ these aeroplanes in that area. Now, one more point I want to mention in your earlier questions is, see, the choice of Ambala is very, very critical.
Yes.
200 kilometers from the border in Pakistan, 200 kilometers from China, when you measure it directly
Correct.
North of Himachal, which is the closest point of the border.
Yes.
So strategically, a good place, deep enough not to be struck. The Pakistanis were never able to hit in 65 or 71 war Ambala. They tried to hit and finally hit a church.
Absolutely.
Similarly, from China, far enough, but close enough for us to be able to quickly reach. And there are only 2 Chinese airfields we have to worry for Ladakh,
Yes.
and that is Gargunza and Hotan. Both are well within the range. In Ambala, in an emergency, they might have to come back and land in Leh. They short of fuel, but otherwise there is no such requirement. They can very much operate from Ambala, do the job and come back. So I thought I'd give you this broader picture.
That's an excellent point that you've raised, which we also covered in our report, Sandeep. This clears up a lot of doubts, doesn't it? Even though the Rafales can easily operate from Leh, in fact, that was one of the India-specific enhancements to the engines to make them capable of operating at high altitudes in extreme cold weather. What Air Marshal Chopra says and what we've reported is exactly that, which is that operating from Ambala, these aircraft have the kind of combat radius that takes care of the entire Ladakh, large parts of Western China, the Tibet Plateau, POK, Pakistan. And so it's not as if these planes have to operate literally from Ladakh to be effective.
Not at all, Shiv. In fact, someone I was talking to the Air Force said that, the aircraft that are deployed in Leh are only for signaling purposes. They would much rather operate them from bases like Ambala, where they can fly with a full load of weapons and fuel. This is an advantage that the Chinese don't have when they're flying off their air bases on the Tibetan Plateau. Because, as you know, as the airfields are at a high altitude, that degrades their combat potential. So the Air Force would very much like their Rafales to operate out of Ambala, where they can operate with a full range of weaponry, payload, fuel, and tackle all the threats in that huge combat radius that you just drew, Shiv.
Very, very interesting. So 7 days to go for the Rafales to arrive. Air Marshal Chopra and Sandeep, stay with me. Another interesting development that we reported to you yesterday, and we have more details of now. Very interesting, because you know that the Indian Air Force jets are operating from Leh, from Ambala and elsewhere. But yesterday we reported to you that Indian Navy fighter jets that usually operate on the aircraft carrier Vikramaditya and are based in Goa are also headed to a northern airbase to aid in the combat patrolling operations in view of what's happening in Ladakh. It's the first time Indian Navy pilots will be flying with Indian Air Force pilots in an operational setting in a live scenario. Take a look. It's one of the most difficult things in military aviation. Landing a fast-moving fighter jet on the tiny runway of a rolling pitching ship deck. Operating carrier deck-based fighters like the MiG-29Ks you see here make Indian naval aviators among the best in the world. Half of these jets remain deployed at sea on board their mothership, aircraft carrier INS Vikramaditya. Seen here during Prime Minister Modi's visit on board shortly after coming to power in 2014. While the other half of these jets, otherwise based in Goa, are now headed to where the proverbial action is. That's right, Ladakh. A certain number of Indian Navy MiG-29K jets are headed to a base in Punjab to support combat air patrol operations over Ladakh. The naval jets will fly alongside MiG-29s of the Indian Air Force already operating in the area. If you're wondering why naval fighters meant for combat at sea are being deployed for inland operations, the reality is these are war assets being used where they're needed the most, that is Ladakh. It highlights the drive towards true joint operations between the services, which has been a problem area for a long time. Also, Navy pilots have been deployed in these areas in the past, and with both the Navy and Air Force operating MiG-29 fighter variants, it's a rare operational setting for Navy pilots to stretch their wings. To be sure, the MiG-29Ks won't be the first Indian naval jets mobilized in the wake of the Ladakh standoff. Since June, Indian Navy P-8I long-range surveillance aircraft have mounted multiple flights to the north to map the Chinese build-up and provide updates to intelligence agencies and ground forces. The MiG-29Ks will now operate in conjunction with these bigger jets in the north. So let's summarize the fighter air power arsenal in the north since tensions escalated with China. Indian Air Force Su-30 MKIs, Indian Air Force Mirage 2000s, Indian Air Force Jaguars, Indian Air Force MiG-29s, and now Indian Navy MiG-29Ks. Bureau Report, India Today. Marshal Chopra, the decision to deploy the MiG-29K fighters in the northern sectors to be part of the operations that are taking place in Ladakh, what did you think of this? You know, these jets are usually flying off the Vikramaditya carrier, but it appears to me that this is an optimal use of war assets where they are needed the most, and also emphasizes jointness between the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy.
Absolutely, Shiv. You know, the air power of any country, all air assets combined, including civilian transport aircraft, will combine to make air power of the country.
Yeah.
Now, MiG-29s are flying over on Vikramaditya. At any given time, only half of them are required on board the ship. The remaining are either on maintenance or doing shore-based training. So therefore, there is an asset which is operationally free and available at this moment, and why not use it? Second, MiG-29K has got not only anti-shipping role, it has got air defense role, it has got role to strike shore-based assets.
Yes.
So therefore, leave aside the maritime shipping, though, a little bit of maritime targets might be found in the lake there in Pangong Song Lake, but that's saying it lightly. But the air defense assets and the shore-based attacks assets are phenomenal. Now, as you have just said, there are 4 types of aeroplanes already there. Jointness apart,
yes.
MiG-29 is a significant aircraft, and the MiG-29Ks are very, very modern aircraft. So when they will join with the MiG-29 upgrade aircraft, who are already positioned in Leh.
Yes.
So as we were talking a little earlier, we don't have to position more than the air defense aircraft in Leh, because short notice they should be able to go and intercept some enemy aircraft, and therefore permanently only perhaps the MiG-29 or
yes.
some equivalent aircraft will be positioned in Leh. So the MiG-29K is joining. I think it's a good signal to the world that the all air assets are now standing by for any foolhardy actions from the other side. So
absolutely.
I think it's a damn good move by moving MiG-29Ks.
Okay, very good to hear that from an Air Force veteran. Sandeep, you don't see it very often. We usually only hear about the divisions between the armed forces. Here we're seeing them actually look to work together, and what better way to work together than in a live combat operational scenario. Do you foresee any problems, or are pilots from the Navy and the Air Force fully attuned to working together on these aircraft, Sandeep?
Well, Shiv, this will be the first time in a very long time that naval fighter jets have been deployed over land. It happened after the 1962 war, when Seahawks from the old INS Vikrant were deployed near Dehradun, and of course during the 65 war as well, the same aircraft deployed in Jamnagar just around the time of the war. But it's been a very long time since we've seen naval fighter jets operating over land, and I'm sure this is exactly what the military leadership has been telling us over the last few months, that look, jointmanship has to come. You cannot have silos, you cannot have armed forces operating in silos. If you have a certain capability with one armed force, that should be deployed for the defense of the nation wherever the emergency might exist, and that's how the P8Is came to be deployed, first in Doklam,
yes.
and then more recently in Ladakh. And this instance of the MiG-29K being deployed, Shiv, is just the way forward. You are going to see increasing use of joint assets, whether it be the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force. They will all have to learn to operate together in the theater commands that the government, the Defense Ministry is planning to set up. So these are the first steps, Shiv, really, that we're seeing towards true integrated jointmanship and theater commands.
Integrated jointmanship, the cohesive use of force. It's not about their aircraft, our aircraft, Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, everyone functioning as one military to face a common threat facing the country. We're going to see a lot more of this going forward, and I'm sure everyone joins me in wishing all of our pilots from the Indian Navy and from the Indian Air Force happy hunting and happy landings. Air Marshal Chopra, Sandeep, always a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me and helping us detail this complicated story for our viewers here on 5 Live. Thank you so much for joining me. And coming up next,